Okay, it looks like we are connected. We are live streaming tonight. In addition to Zoom, we are on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and actually 2 Facebook pages. I will put the links to all of those platforms in the comments in a moment. If anybody wants to head over there and like the streams and share them right away, that would be awesome. And I'm going to hand it over to Marie to welcome everybody here tonight.
Thank you, Emma. Good evening. We're so honored that all of you are joining us this evening across 4 different media platforms to participate in this presentation, Community-Controlled Policing, a proposal for an amendment to the Minneapolis Charter. Before we close the chat for the program, please take a moment to enter your name and where you are from. As members of the Domestic and Domestic Militarism Committee of Women Against Military Madness, we are pleased to present this forum with the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar. Before we begin, please note that the chat will be disabled in Zoom when our guests begin their presentations, so as not to distract from it. We invite you to ask questions using the Zoom chat sent to the hosts only, or in the comments if you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. We will be collecting your questions for Q&A following the presentation. Now I will turn it over to Joe, who will introduce our speakers.
Hi. The Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar, formed after the murder of Jamar Clark by the Minneapolis Police Department on the night of November 15th, 2015. After the 4th Precinct occupation, they recognized the need to continue gathering people around the fight against police crimes. They believe that this fight can and must unite the Black Lives Matter movement and everyday working people in the community. TCC4J meets weekly to plan community meetings, marches and rallies, press conferences and actions which unite our community and pressure city, county, and state officials to hold police accountable and end police violence in our communities. Their events and collaborations have attendance of 50 to 10,000 plus. In particular, they centralize their organizing in the vibrant community of North Minneapolis. Currently, they have formed Minneapolis for Community Control of Police to demand community control of the police. It is members of that group that will be speaking with us tonight. Welcome, Hannah, Elowen, Gina, and Jay, and thank you for being here.
All right, I can go ahead and share my screen. And then I think we're going to have Hannah start us off.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Welcome to CPAC 101, a community workshop on community control of the police. My name is Hannah. I'll be doing an introduction for you for CPAC, sort of running you through what it is and a little bit of how it works. And we can move on to the next slide. So CPAC stands for Civilian Police Accountability Commission. It used to be council, but we've changed it to commission. It's the idea that people who live in a community should be able to determine how it's policed, not special interest groups, police federation, or career politicians. This would establish community control of the police by creating a democratically elected all local council that is involved in critical decision-making such as rules, guideline, discipline, controlling the budget, and controlling things such as contract negotiations. Now, this is not an oversight or review board. CPAC will replace all other city agencies overseeing police in Minneapolis. One way that it's different is that a civilian review board can't issue findings of fact due to Minnesota law, while CPAC could. It's ultimately a tool for self-determination. So the CPAC Minneapolis composition would be created out of 13 total members, each with 4-year terms. The qualifications for the role would involve specific experience in defending the rights of marginalized folks. You cannot be COP or COP adjacent. This is specifically stated as opposed to other systems in place right now, and it's required that you reside locally in the area that you are representing. All right, and next up, we have a short video for you. This is a video from Chicago, who just passed their first step towards community control with the Empowering Communities for Public Safety. It was created through a joining of the CPAC coalition in Chicago and another coalition. So we've modeled a lot of our work after them, and we're still in contact and have friends down there. So thank you.
And what do we mean by community control of the police? What do we mean? We mean that we, the people, have the final voice, the decisive voice in saying who polices our communities and how our communities are policed. Who, that means no more racist cops. That's what who means. How, defund. We need to be in charge of that. I don't trust them to defund the police. Do you? We need to defund them. We need to defund them. We need to demilitarize them, and we need to regulate them out of existence.
All right, thank you, Hannah, for giving us that introduction. And my name is Elwin, also with Minneapolis for Community Control of Police, and also a member of the city's Coalition for Justice for Jamar. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the demand for community control of police and some of the context around that demand here in Minneapolis and also beyond in other cities as well. So I started out with this quote, and I'll read that. It says, "There, being the police, real power is manifested in the organized guns and force. But we are saying that the people in this community, the people in this country, don't have any control over that organized guns, force, and power. We are saying that the capitalists, the racists, and others have control over it. And we are saying that we want to change it, that we want to revolutionize it, turn it over into the hands of the people for a new process to occur. We are saying we want community control." And so this is a quote from Bobby Seale, June 1st, 1973, at the Chicago Community Control of the Police Conference. And I think this quote really speaks to why we continue to need community control of police, and also highlights that this is a demand that has a great history and people have been fighting for, and we build upon that work as well. And so the demand for community control is a long-held demand. So looking at Reconstruction, so during Black Reconstruction, and this is a quote from Frank Chapman, who you all heard speak in that video, and who's a leader from Chicago, who's actually just visiting this weekend here in Minneapolis. And so it's a quote from his book, and it says, "Black people as a people had democratic community control in the Black Belt, Black majority counties over how the law was enforced and who enforced it." And so that was a really key opportunity of Black Reconstruction before it was betrayed and the truth was pulled out of the South, was that Black people had community control in that they were getting people elected and had a lot of marshals and sheriffs that were elected at that time too. So there was that element of community control. And so now then moving forward, when we saw the calls for commissions, community control of the police through commissions, as we are fighting for, that was really a call being made by the Black Panther Party And so they were fighting for community control of police, and in multiple cities, including Chicago, Detroit, and then in Berkeley, they actually had a petition for it. And so 1970, there was a petition calling for the establishment of a community board that had hiring, firing, and policy setting powers, and then also that would require cops to live in the community where they work, and then also had an element that would split up the department into 3 separate districts, one for predominantly Black neighborhoods, one for predominantly white neighborhoods, and one for campus. And again, those demands all rooted in the idea of self-determination, and that people should have the right to determine for themselves how they're policed, if they're policed, and who is policing them. Go back. So that's just to highlight some of that history. And again, here's another quote. This is speaking again of a community control police conference. This is from June 9th, 1973, an article in the Black Panther Intercommunal News Service. This quote says, "Through the organization of community control of police, it would be possible to obtain control of the following institutions: recreation, schools, prisons, factories, courts, medical care, welfare, housing, and communications." So that's speaking to the importance of getting community control of police to then be able to stop some of that that repression that makes it hard to organize in those other areas that we also need to have self-determination around, and people need to be able to have control over those other institutions in our lives as well. So some context for the demands for community control of police. So Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar has been calling for community control of the police in Minneapolis since 2017, originally calling it MPAC for Minneapolis Police Accountability Commission, then moving to CPAC. And so a lot of that time was spent talking with community about community control in general and working on writing the legislation. And then in March, we actually started collecting signatures for our charter amendment. And so CPAC, as Hannah mentioned, a lot of our legislation is based off of and built off of Chicago and then made specific to our context here. And in Chicago, as Hannah mentioned, they passed their ordinance and are now working towards a referendum that would really establish community control of police in the way that they want to. And then other cities fighting for CPAC include Milwaukee, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, Salt Lake City, and others as well. And some of the challenges around in this fight are that there's a lot of money funneled into fighting it. So both being opposed by police federations and politicians, and that's kind of where we see the situation in Minnesota, where the review boards really can't do too much because of this law that was really pushed by police federations. And so we know that police federations and politicians have continued to push back against the idea of community control of police. And an example of that was in Chicago, where the vote on the ordinance was pushed at the mayor's request. And then also some of those lookalikes, so CPAC lookalikes that aren't actually community control of the police because the community doesn't really have that power. So it might look like community control of police, but it doesn't have the same teeth that CPAC has. And again, we saw that look to Chicago for kind of an example of that. And in the end, the two different groups came together in Chicago to push for this ordinance that they did get passed. So that is some of the historical context and current context. So I'm going to pass it to Jay to talk a little bit about the specific powers and duties of CPAC.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jay. I use they, he pronouns. I'm also with Minneapolis for Community Control Police and TCC4J. Basically, we don't go through every power and duty that's outlined in legislation, but we did kind of pick out some of the more important ones and some of the ones that people ask us a lot about. So I'm just gonna kind of be going over those. So one of the things that the CPAC would be able to do that's really critical is appoint the chief of police. Whereas a lot of the other proposals kind of have the mayor appointing a chief of police. I think that it's a lot more powerful that a democratically elected commission of people rather than just one person decides who should be the chief. The CPAC would also adopt policies for the police department which would include reviewing existing policies, procedures, and special orders, and then opening existing policies for public comment, which is something that's really important because there really isn't any way for people in Minneapolis, at least, to have comment on existing policies other than, showing up outside of the precinct at a protest. So this would kind of allow people to have a say in what the policies of the police department even are. The CPAC would also serve as a board to hear, review, and sign off on disciplinary actions. And they would refer cases for prosecution when necessary. Whereas right now, when a case is referred to the BCA or when the BCA takes up a case, they really don't have any real impetus to fully investigate that case, nor do they give information about the case to the families of the victim. And so there's a lot of red tape in even getting basic information from the BCA. And so the CPAC would serve to take that over. Go to the next slide. The CPAC would also determine the police budget and submit it to the city council, as opposed to now, which basically the budget just gets rubber stamped. And the city council often gets railroaded by the police federations into making a much higher budget than they actually should have, which they then spend on militarized equipment that we don't really want in our communities. The members of the commission would also be in charge of training any additional staff required to run kind of the CPAC. So that would include things like people who would handle the investigations, people who would handle clerical work, follow up on complaints, that kind of thing. And then something that the CPAC could do that they don't necessarily have to do, but the amazing thing about a CPAC is that the whole point of them being elected by ward is that they represent people in their ward. And so if the people of Minneapolis want, for example, for the Minneapolis Police Department to no longer be allowed to replicate what they did on the highway back in November when 646 people were arrested for exercising their freedom of speech, the CPAC could add that to the police operations handbook. They could disallow the use of police by Minneapolis public schools. They would also negotiate and approve contracts with the police federation, again, as opposed to them pretty much getting rubber stamped currently. And then something else that the CPAC can be in charge of is determining the boundaries of police precincts if those need to be changed. So we want to talk a little bit about district level and like the difference between the larger CPAC and district level CPAC. So the reason that there's 13 members is that they're meant to represent the wards of Minneapolis. And so each commission member would be in charge of reviewing complaints and investigating officers on the district level. So whichever police precinct is in their ward, essentially, they would be in charge of overseeing that specific precinct. And they are also in charge of managing the Minneapolis Police Department as a whole. So it kind of divides the work so that things that maybe don't need to be convened with the whole CPAC don't kind of take up that time. And something else that like is why we believe that a CPAC is the way to go is that these district offices and the CPAC as a whole have no other responsibilities other than regulating and overseeing police. And one of the problems right now with how police are overseen is that the people that are in charge of doing that have a lot of other responsibilities. They have other things that they have to focus on, and often complaints about the police don't make their priority list. With a CPAC, that's all that they are hired to do. And it's their job. They are enshrined in the city charter. Something else that we don't really put in the slides too is that the CPAC would report out on their findings, which is something that I think is really critical and really different to the current process of filing complaints and trying to limit the power of the police. The CPAC would have to have a certain number of public meetings each year, and they also have to publish their findings within, like, I think in the legislation, it's 48 hours of completing like an investigation. I'm not 100% sure that's the right number of hours, but it's a set time limit. And so basically this would just make processes involving police a lot more transparent and would give everyday people who are affected by police operations the opportunity to control that more fully. And then there's a short video where we kind of outline how a charter amendment works, because a lot of people don't know how the charter works or even what a charter is, which, like, I would include myself in that before I started working on this. So it's just really good to have people understand the process. So I'm going to hand that over to Gina.
And I'll just do a voiceover as this runs. So. Okay, so obviously we've decided to go the charter amendment route for CPAC. And basically the charter is the constitution for the city of Minneapolis. And what that does is it broadly outlines the powers and duties of the various departments. The powers, how it's structured, which officials are elected, term lengths, responsibilities, and lines of authority for these departments. And so, how do we get there is the next question. So we're going the ballot question route where people would vote in an upcoming election, and we're aiming for November 2022. And if 51% or more of the people vote for yes on this ballot question, then our amendment will be added to the charter. And so how this works is we actually skipped this step. We distilled our proposal down to less than 1,000 words so that we could circumvent the Charter Commission because they're extremely conservative. This is where we're at right now, step 2, which is gathering about 5% of the number of voters from Minneapolis that voted in the previous state general election. That would be about 12,000 votes. The 5% would be about 12,000. We're going for about 14 to have a little bit of buffer room. And then once we get the 12,000 signatures, we turn it over to the city and they verify that they're valid signatures and that these people live in Minneapolis. Then it goes on the ballot. We get 51% and we have community control of the police. We have a big party. Right. So, like I said a minute ago, we have started collecting signatures to get this on the ballot. We're aiming for the November 2022 election. And we have on our website is a list of places where you can go sign it in person. Those places include Mayday Books, Royal Grounds Coffee Shop, Driftwood Char Bar, Milkweed Coffee, and I believe we're always adding more to that list. So yes, we're collecting signatures right now. And what the charter amendment that we have right now broadly outlines duties and responsibilities that the CPAC will have, and will pretty much write them in stone in the charter. If somebody wanted to change this in the future, they'd have to go through the Charter Commission or through the ballot question. So it would be much more a much more solid foundation to build a CPAC. So there we go. And then afterwards, once we get that in place, we'll go the city ordinance to fill in some, the details, like how investigations might take place, general rules about, how our information would be published, the results of our investigations, and so much more. To get an ordinance passed is the usual lawmaking process. A city council member would have to introduce it, and to pass, we would need either a simple majority, 7 of 10 folks on the city council voting for it, or a 2/3 without the mayor's signature. Okay, and then I believe this question kind of came up in the chat. Right now, the city council proposal is very close to Yes for Minneapolis. It's just reworded a little bit, but both our proposal and Yes for Minneapolis eliminates that minimum officer required calculation that's in the charter, which is great. Yes for Minneapolis changes the name of the police department to the Department of Public Safety that can have police officers. But that's about as far as the Yes for Minneapolis proposal goes, is it moves it and renames it. And it is under the city council control, essentially. Whereas ours takes that control away from the city council. We've seen, even with the events of the past year, the city council cannot take action, even the most basic steps to rein in the police department. They have had their chance. So CPAC would put this in the hands of the people that are directly affected by police activity. We would have the power to commend, discipline, or discharge any employee of the department. One of the biggest things is that we would have the duty to investigate all internal and external complaints and report on those results back to the complainant and to the public. When we're reporting to the public, of course, we will follow data privacy laws and go further than that so that we can prevent retaliation against anybody who might be complaining. Let's see. We would be able to determine the budget, as Jay was pointing out before, review, modify policy and procedure. We would also have the option of opening policy procedure to the public for public comment, saying, this is what we have in the rule book right now. What do you think? And take that feedback into consideration when making changes. And yeah, we would have a sole focus on regulating police. Yes, for Minneapolis does none of that. So that's the main difference. And to stay involved, we have all kinds of, there's a form here. And we're going to put that in the chat, where if you want to get involved further, you can go to this Google form and enter in your information, and we'll get back out to you. You can follow us on social media, TCC4J, CPAC Minneapolis, or Minneapolis for CCP. That's Minneapolis for Community Control of Police. We have committees that you can join working on this. Or another option would be, we can come to your group, any group whatsoever. It can be friends, it can be a volleyball or knitting club, we don't care. We'll give this presentation to anyone who is interested. And we also have a dedicated website where, like I said before, the place where you can sign. Our to get it on the ballot. We have that list there. We also have the full text of the charter amendment there in English, Spanish, Somali, and we've got other languages continually going through review too. And share, our media. Right. And yes, if you have questions or you want to get involved, we'll put that link in the chat as well. And I think we can open this up for.
All right, thank you, everybody. I think I've watched this myself before, but it's always informative and interesting to hear again. And I hope that there's a few people tuning in that learn some things, and hopefully will fill out your forms. We've been collecting questions during the presentation here on Zoom and on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. Just a reminder, if you are watching on one of those platforms and you haven't shared already, if you could please share this live stream and also ask a question if you have one. And I am going to hand it off to Diane. She's another board member of WAMM like myself and a member of the End Domestic Militarism Committee. And Diane is going to ask our first question.
Well, actually, a lot of the great information you presented was asked by people, particularly the difference between your proposal and the Yes for Minneapolis. One of the questions then that I think maybe I have is, I know they're different, and that's a great side-by-side thing that you had up there. I think that's really important for people to see. Is their timeline different than your timeline? So I think that's an important thing, because I think people will think, well, there's everything is happening now, and which one am I going to pick? But it sounds like they're different. So Gina, you have an answer to that, I think.
Yeah, so my understanding is that the Yes for Minneapolis proposal will be on the ballot for this fall. Ours is, we're aiming to get it on the ballot for next November, which would be 2022. Because we didn't start collecting signatures until relatively late. And the deadline for turning those signatures into the city for verification is usually somewhere around in May. So, and then also I wanted to mention about the comparing Yes for Minneapolis to CPAC. Communities United Against Police Brutality, CUAPB, recently put out an excellent statement about Yes for Minneapolis. So I would encourage people to go check that out as well.
Yeah, and I'll add to that by saying that something else that we get asked a lot is, what happens if Yes for Minneapolis passes? So if Yes for Minneapolis were to pass, the only thing that would really change for us is that we would have to rework a little bit of our charter language to reflect the department name change. And then we would have to recollect our signatures again, which would be inconvenient, but I think it's important for me to let people know that, just because this other amendment might pass doesn't mean that we think that we should just abandon ours. We think that this is really strong legislation that we've come up with. And so we would just start our efforts over again. And all of us are here for kind of the long haul. So, but that is what would happen if Yes for Minneapolis does pass this fall.
We had a question from Sarah about on signatures, and you've started collecting them, and about how many, do you have any guess how many signatures you've collected so far?
I can answer that one. So we've collected, I think, like 3,500, somewhere around there so far. And that's only the ones that we currently have notarized. So we have more that we haven't counted yet. So we're actually doing, I mean, considering that we really only started really collecting signatures and doing door knocking a couple of months ago, we're really doing pretty good. None of us are paid. We're all volunteers. So it's just weekends and Thursday nights collecting signatures. So we're trucking along.
I think what I'd like to do is bring it back to maybe, I think to the committee, and Jay, you did this, as what kinds of questions are you getting from the community, or how can we, if people ask us about it, how can we, are there things that we should be explaining? Or questions that you're getting that seem, you've got to explain over and over to people. Is there what would they be, and how can we answer those for people?
Yeah, anybody else, any of the other presenters can feel free to chime in too. But I would say that we get asked a ton of questions about, we get a lot of questions about Yes for Minneapolis and like, is this the same thing? We get a lot of, like Gina put in the chat, how is this different from a civilian oversight board? And the way that we're different than a civilian oversight board is that it's simply not an oversight board. The CPAC is comprised of actual city employees. And so the law about finding a fact with review boards simply doesn't apply to the CPAC, which is why we went this route. Another question that we get asked a lot is, well, how do you think that you're going to prevent like pro-cop people from being elected to the council? The thing about elections is that they're elections, and so people have to run and people have to vote. So that's the, I guess, downside of democratically elected things. But we think that democracy is really critical to control of the police. Because all of our communities are different in Minneapolis. People on the north side don't have the same needs as people on the south side. They don't have the same experience with the police. And so that democratically elected piece is really important. But there really isn't any way that we can like control for who runs other than the stipulations like you can't have been a former cop. You can't, you can't live in Hugo and try to run for the community, for the Civilian Police Accountability Commission. So there are a couple of things that we've tried to control, but ultimately that's kind of out of our hands. And then maybe the last question that we get often is kind of about the structure of the CPAC and why there's 13 members. And like sometimes people are confused about like, well, are they just in charge of their individual precinct and like not the whole police department? We kind of went through that in the slideshow, but basically each representative on the CPAC would like be in charge of the police precinct in their district, which means that there would be some districts that have like 2 CPAC members for one police precinct. It's just how the wards kind of work out. But yeah, so they would be in charge of daily operations for that precinct. And then anything that needs to be referred to kind of the larger CPAC for decision-making that would affect the whole Minneapolis Police Department, that would be kind of the whole CPAC would have to convene for that.
And if it's all right, I'll just add on to that. That another question that I think I've gotten quite a few times is, well, who say, well, I believe that we should have mental health professionals responding to calls instead of police, and when people are in mental health crises, or different people responding, and kind of ask, well, how does community control of the police have to do with that? How does your legislation have to do with that? And kind of the response there is that when you have an elected body that has the power to set policy, they can do that. They can decide that this is how policy is shifting. And as someone who's electing them, you can elect people who will make those changes that you see. And kind of going back to then, I think something that was touched on in our presentation too, is that we need an elected body to make those changes. We don't trust that suddenly the city council is going to say, let's have mental health professionals respond more, because that hasn't happened so far. We need people who are directly responsible to us to make those changes, and they definitely can with that power to set policy.
We did have a specific question from Joe. How are the CPAC board members elected? I mean, is there a format that you'll have for being elected through the whole kind of ward, or will people apply and then be elected citywide, or what's kind of the process for that election, how they're elected?
Yeah, so that would follow just what ward they live in, which mirrors like the city council wards. So if you're registered in, I don't know Minneapolis wards very well, but Ward 10, then you would get when you go to vote, you'd get a list of people who have registered to run in that district. So just like
during a regular voting, just like during the regular voting.
Yeah, very much like how you would elect school board representatives, that sort of thing.
Another one I see here is, and Jay answered this as well, but Sarah was asking, can organizations sign on and or endorse CPAC?
Yeah, I just put a link to a Google form for endorsers. We have a lot of like endorsers that haven't filled out the form, so it's not like a requirement, but it is good to know who all is in support of us. So yeah, we can send that link to people, but if you're an individual, you can just kind of go to the link and fill that out as yourself. And if you're an org, we'd probably appreciate like an email and to present the CPAC information to you before you like formally endorse, but anybody can endorse.
One question that I have had people ask a lot is how this would affect the qualified immunity. And basically, since the CPAC would have control over policy and procedure, they would be able to implement a disciplinary reset in the department, which is basically a way of saying, so we're wiping the slate clean as far as disciplinary measures go, and going forward, this is how we're going to operate.
I don't have other questions right this moment. Does anyone, Emma or others, have any thing you would like to ask before we ask people to give any closing comments or anything?
I have a question. Can anyone, someone like myself who lives outside the city, can we endorse? No.
Yeah, like I don't see why not. Like,
okay.
I think a lot of people that, I think it is unfortunate that there's a lot of people that live in like Richfield or like literally right next to like the city limits that really want to but can't. But yeah, like I mean, people who don't live in Minneapolis proper can still like spread the word, can still like talk to people about why this is a revolutionary piece of legislation. And yeah, I think to me, what's important to highlight about CPAC is that you can't like defund or abolish or regulate anything that you don't control. And so like this is about making sure that the people that actually have a vested interest in defunding the police or abolishing the police or any sort of control over police operations, that like it's in the hands of people that will actually do it, and that are actually directly accountable to the community in a way that city council and the mayor simply are not. They ignore the wishes of their constituents all the time. So I think that the Civilian Review Board is just a lot stronger and a lot more powerful, and you can help us by kind of spreading that.
I was thinking too that maybe like if I endorse it and get all my friends where I live to endorse it, my own community might, it might be the beginning of something in my own community.
And for other people who, if you don't live in Minneapolis, you can help us collect signatures still too. So that can be your impact, in fighting to get this passed as well.
Are there any efforts in other cities, like similar things happening in places that have had their own bad things happening, like Brooklyn Center and Richfield?
Like, you mean in Minnesota?
St. Paul, yeah.
I don't think so. I think we're the only like CPAC entity that exists in the cities. And I also don't know of any like small towns that have decided to kind of go through this process, but it's also like a really long and pretty convoluted process by design. So I think there are a lot of places that would be encouraged by us getting this passed, and would feel like they could do something like this in their.
Yeah. Have you thought, I know this would be like in the future, but I guess regardless of how everything pans out, but like being an example for other groups, like being able to consult with like other cities and towns and like walk them through the steps, and like have you guys thought about that or discussed like doing things like that?
I know that, for me, I live in St. Paul, so, and there's
too.
TCC4J who live in St. Paul, and so definitely always is like, all right, we're going there next, and so I think in TCC4J, like Jay mentioned, there's a lot of people who in Minneapolis for Community Control Police, there's a lot of people who live around the Twin Cities area, and so I think all of us would love to see Community Control Police in every city and town that we live in and everywhere. And other cities beyond Minnesota, I think maybe you're speaking specifically to Minnesota, but a lot of through the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, we have a lot of relationships, so are kind of able to speak about our experiences and also have learn from Chicago and their experiences in other cities like Tallahassee or Jacksonville or Milwaukee as well.
And something that I didn't mention earlier when you asked the question too is the students at the University of Minnesota are also trying to get community control police, and we definitely they were free to use our legislation as a template. They were free to ask us questions. So that's kind of the only other entity that's kind of doing the same thing, but the students are really trying to take control over UMPD, which is a whole other struggle, but we totally support them in that.
One question, and then Gina had her hand up earlier. So Gina, did you have something to add right now?
No, not right now. Go ahead.
I think for the last question we've got is Joe said, if one Googles CPAC, the first hit that comes up is an organization that's existed since 1974, our friends, the Conservative Political Action Conference or Committee. And she was just wondering about that acronym. And I don't know, are there hyphens in it? Or if people were to Google that, I guess you'd know it was not the same group, but there is a group with those same acronyms, probably on the spectrum. So that was her.
Yeah, we decided to stick with CPAC, just because that measured the what they were calling it in Chicago at the time. So, yeah, it's
Yeah,
kind of
and
oh, go ahead.
no, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say it's kind of a national solidarity sort of thing for us. But
I was basically going to say that, and then also add that, yeah, like there's an acronym for like everything.
Yeah.
And like there's really
Yeah,
no way for us to like completely, there's going to be like somebody that's had like a stupid something that like shares the same acronym. So we were just kind of like, whatever, it's fine. But yeah, I think that we also encourage people, like we direct people to like our website as opposed to Google, because we have links to like the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repressions information about CPACs and what they are. And so I guess we just encourage a little more like directed research for people to kind of, I don't know, get around that.
Joel and Roger had their hand up at some point, Diane, I don't know. Did you have something you wanted?
Well, I was the one that raised the question because I sat in here late, and so while I fully approve of the idea of community control of police and what's going on there, I didn't know what CPAC stood for, so I Googled it and I came up with it. Found out that with what comes up first. And you can get there eventually, but what comes up first is this oppositely motivated organization. And so I just was wondering, why would you choose use an acronym like that really is more widely used for a group that has kind of an opposite motivation than yours. I mean, you're right that you can't avoid all the acronyms that are out there, but you do have a choice of naming your own group in a way that is as effective as possible. So I was just wondering if it could have been done a little bit differently, but
the conservative group stole it from them. Maybe the conservative group stole it from them.
Well, they said they were in existence since 1974, so I doubt that.
And community control of the police was been in existence as a demand of the Black Panthers since at least 1968. So technically we predate them. They stole it from us.
All right. Well, that's good.
And if you want to go even further back than that, the whole idea of community control of the police is, as we said, a Reconstruction idea. So they really ripped us off. If we're gonna get date technical about it.
That was good information. I hadn't heard that before about the Reconstruction part of that. So
yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's good that issue came up, because our listeners will know that this is going to happen when they try to get you, and so they'll know to look beyond that. And so it's great that this last issue did come up and that we're aware of it. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who has attended our forum this evening. And I want to thank especially our guests and members of the Civilian Police Accountability Commission for informing us about the timely issue of community control of the police. Please like and follow WAMM and Domestic Militarism and Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar on social media, and check the comments now to find those links. Thanks again, and have a great evening.